On August 2, 1589, the Château de Saint-Cloud, located on the outskirts of Paris, became the backdrop for one of the most controversial deaths in French history. King Henry III, the last monarch of the Valois dynasty, lay dying after being stabbed by a fanatical monk. This death was not just any royal passing. It marked the end of a life that had long been filled with scandal, intrigue, and the bizarre habits of a king whose reign was filled with controversy. At the age of 37, Henry III's life was already marked by a series of controversies. He had shocked all of Europe with his eccentricities, his flamboyant mannerisms, and his obsession with luxury and feminine habits. This was a king who adorned himself in jewels, perfumes, and extravagant clothing, transforming the French court into the center of royal scandals unlike any seen before. He was known for his fascination with fashion, cosmetics, and jewelry, and his private life became the subject of constant whispers and gossip throughout Europe. Born on September 19, 1551, as the third son of Henry II and Catherine de' Medici, Henry III's early years were far from typical for a future monarch. His childhood behaviors deeply concerned the French court, as he demonstrated an early interest in activities considered inappropriate for a prince. While his brothers enjoyed games of war and politics, Henry preferred dolls and other feminine pursuits. His mother, Catherine de' Medici, tried everything to correct these behaviors, but her efforts were futile. As Henry grew into his adolescence, his interests became even more unusual for a prince of his time. Instead of studying war and politics, he spent hours in front of mirrors, experimenting with hairstyles, applying imported perfumes and powders, and adorning himself with jewelry. His tutors expressed concern, as Henry seemed more interested in women's clothing than in the affairs of state. His behavior was not only unorthodox, but also deeply unsettling to those around him. At the age of 16, Henry's appearance at a court ball shocked the nobility. He wore an outfit that blended masculine and feminine elements, causing an immediate scandal. His attire included a bodice embroidered with pearls, a puffy skirt beneath a masculine doublet, and a diamond necklace that belonged to his mother. This audacious display of fashion was only the beginning of Henry's public controversies. To curb these behaviors, Catherine de' Medici sent Henry to Poland in 1573, where he was elected king. Her hope was that royal responsibility and distance from Paris would help to instill more traditional values in her son. However, the opposite happened. In Poland, Henry's eccentricities only intensified. He transformed his court into a spectacle of feminine luxury, and his behavior scandalized the Polish nobility. He received ambassadors while dressed in ornate dresses, wore a tiara studded with precious stones, and insisted on taking perfumed baths daily. Henry's court became the talk of Europe, as he surrounded himself with luxury and beauty, living a life that defied all expectations for a king. In 1574, when Henry's brother, Charles IX, passed away, Henry secretly abandoned Poland and returned to France to assume the throne. His escape was as unconventional as everything else in his life. He traveled disguised as an Italian noblewoman, wearing veils and feminine clothing. Upon his return, his coronation was a spectacle of its own. Henry insisted on a specially modified crown to accommodate his elaborate hairstyle, and his coronation robes were embroidered with pearls and precious stones in a manner that mimicked the dresses of previous queens. His coronation so scandalized the French nobility that many nobles refused to attend the event. Once crowned King of France, Henry began to make drastic changes to the court, instituting new etiquette protocols that shocked the European aristocracy. He required courtiers to treat matters of fashion and beauty with as much seriousness as the affairs of state. Royal council meetings often included discussions about the latest trends in hairstyles and cosmetics, demonstrating how deeply Henry's interests in fashion influenced his reign. One of the most controversial aspects of Henry's reign was his relationship with his minions, extremely beautiful young courtiers whom he kept around him constantly. These young men received titles, lands, and privileges, despite their lack of political experience. The minions created a subculture of masculinity that challenged the traditional norms of the time. Among the most famous were Jean-Louis Daguerre and François de Pin, who accompanied Henry everywhere, slept in chambers near him, and participated in beauty rituals that lasted for hours. The relationship between Henry and his minions became the subject of endless speculation. One of Henry's minions, Joyeux, became nearly as famous as the king himself. Henry spent an astronomical fortune on Joyeux's wedding, creating an elaborate ceremony that rivaled royal weddings. The king personally supervised every detail of the celebration, from floral arrangements to guest attire. His obsession with beauty and fashion drained the French treasury, contributing to the country's growing financial crisis. Henry's obsession with his appearance was not limited to extravagant weddings or public events. He spent hours daily grooming himself, applying makeup, and selecting jewelry. His outfits were so elaborate that they often cost more than the annual budget of small French cities. His vanity was legendary, and he kept a detailed diary of his outfits to ensure he never repeated the same appearance in public. This obsession with his own appearance extended to religious events, where Henry's participation in Catholic ceremonies became highly controversial. He would often wear modified habits that looked more like ornate feminine dresses than appropriate attire for devotion. Many bishops refused to officiate Mass in his presence, and the Catholic League used Henry's feminine behavior as a tool to undermine his reign. They spread pamphlets across Paris, describing Henry as a king who had abandoned his masculinity and, therefore, was unfit to rule. In an attempt to counterbalance this criticism, Henry created a personal religious order, the Order of the Holy Spirit. However, even the ceremonies of this order were criticized as theatrical and his efforts to demonstrate his religious devotion were seen as excessively feminine, further alienating him from both his enemies and his subjects. Henry's private life was equally controversial. Although he married Louise de Lorraine in 1575, their marriage was purely political and did not produce any children. Louise, a pious and withdrawn woman, rarely appeared in public and lived in virtual seclusion at the palace. This lack of direct heirs contributed to the growing political instability in France. Critics of Henry used his apparent disinterest in women and his lack of a legitimate heir as evidence that he was incapable of fulfilling his royal duties. By the late 1580s, France's political situation had worsened. The wars of religion between Catholics and Protestants intensified, and Henry's controversial behavior only served to further isolate him politically. In 1588, he was forced to flee Paris during the Day of the Barricades, a public humiliation that left him with little support from his subjects. Despite the danger he faced, Henry insisted on taking his most precious outfits and jewelry with him, reinforcing the perception that his vanity was more important than the survival of the monarchy. In his final months, Henry became increasingly paranoid and isolated. His beloved minions had either died in duels or distanced themselves from him out of fear, and he was left surrounded only by opportunistic courtiers. Despite his deteriorating political situation, Henry continued his obsessive beauty rituals, as if maintaining his appearance could restore his lost authority. On August 2, 1589, Henry III's life came to a violent and tragic end when he was stabbed by Jacques, a fanatical Dominican monk. His death marked the end of the Valois dynasty and sealed his place in history as one of France's most controversial kings. Henry's final words, which were whispered about his beloved minions, revealed the depth of his true affections. His reign, filled with excesses and contradictions, left a complex legacy that continues to fascinate historians to this day. Henry III was a king who defied convention in every way. He was a patron of the arts, a skilled politician when necessary, but also a monarch whose identity and behavior baffled and scandalized his contemporaries. His court was the site of some of the greatest cultural advances of the French Renaissance, yet it also became a symbol of excess and moral decay. His story serves as a reminder of the complexities of monarchy, identity, and the forces of public opinion that can shape the legacies of historical figures.